Hi, my name's Matt Church. Welcome to the Observer Effect. We're going to have another look at some great videos of people speaking online. And in this episode, I wanted to look particularly at Elisabeth Gilbert and maybe a little look at Al Gore and explore the concept of storytelling and how you can be better at it. So let's get straight into it. As always, with the Observer Effect, what I'd encourage you to do is watch the whole presentation yourself and then maybe come back and watch this commentary, because it'll have greater nuance for you. Let's go straight into Liz Gilbert at a TED Talk. This is in 2009, and once again, TED.com, ideas worth spreading.
So, I am a writer. Writing books is my profession, but it's more than that, of course. It is also my great lifelong love and fascination. And I don't expect that that's ever going to change. But that said, something kind of peculiar has happened recently in my life and in my career, which has caused me to have to sort of recalibrate my whole relationship with this work. And the peculiar thing is that I recently wrote this book, this memoir called Eat, Pray, Love, which decidedly unlike any of my previous books, went out in the world for some reason and became this big mega sensation, international bestseller thing, the result of which is that everywhere I go now, people treat me like I'm doomed. Seriously.
So there are essentially four types of stories, and there are many more variations. And if you look into Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces, you start to explore some of the science of storytelling. But I like to teach that there are kind of four stories. There's the personal story where you're talking about yourself, and you can see that Elisabeth Gilbert has started with that. These are really hard stories to tell because, and this is not culturally true in every culture on the planet, but essentially talking yourself up and being the hero of your own story is not always the best way to start a presentation. Telling a story about someone who is like an icon is often easier. So it's like the hero you admire, and that could be your mother, it could be your father, it could be someone you met on the street, it could be your teacher when you were 5 years old. It doesn't have to be, and it could be someone you know or someone unknown. It could be someone you've read about, or maybe you've read an autobiography of someone and that's really moved you. So telling your own story is really, really hard, and it's kind of the most difficult of the four. Telling the story of someone else you admire is very easy, very natural, and very comfortable. And the other two are an anecdotal story, like I was walking down the street the other day and had to buy some milk. And then a historical story where you might tell a story about ancient Rome or even World War II or whatever it might be that you consider to be history in that moment. Now, those four types of stories, when you're starting off as a speaker, are probably worth exploring. And I suggest that every great speaker wants to develop 7 signature stories that you can tell that become uniquely differentiated and uniquely part of your own. Let's continue a little bit with Liz Gilbert as she's telling the story of herself and setting up the fundamental premise of you are not rewarded in the creative works, and that the creative work is sometimes separate of you. Let's see how we go in this next part.
Doomed. Like, they come up to me now like all worried and they say, aren't you afraid you're never going to be able to top that? Aren't you afraid you're going to keep writing for your whole life and you're never again going to create a book that anybody in the world cares about at all, ever again? So that's reassuring, but it would be worse, except for that I happen to remember that over 20 years ago, when I first started telling people when I was a teenager that I wanted to be a writer, I was met with this same kind of sort of fear-based reaction, and people would say, aren't you afraid you're never going to have any success? Aren't you afraid the humiliation of rejection will kill you? Aren't you afraid that you're going to work your whole life at this craft and nothing's ever going to...
There's a quality of good storytelling when you use the hero's journey, and that is that it has this moment of courage. And in the archetype of storytelling, they'll call this crossing the first threshold. And basically what should happen is a story should have a call to adventure, a refusal from the call, and then a crossing of the first threshold. So quite early in a story, you want to get to a moment that could be defined as courageous. And linking back to the time where she was courageous about her career. I feel like Elisabeth Gilbert's doing that quite well. Now, if we were to explore the idea of the hero's journey, there are so many versions of it. I love this little link. This is a blogger called Dopamine, and Dopamine has identified here a beautiful illustration of this hero's journey. And it talks about the call to adventure, meeting a mentor, crossing the threshold, trials and failure, death and rebirth, all the way through to the end. And you can kind of pick up any classic story that you've ever seen, like say A Hobbit by J.R. Tolkien, and it's like, come on, let's go out on an adventure. And the little hobbit goes, no, I'm not going. I'm staying home where I'm comfortable. And then it's, go on, I bet you can. And the courage crosses and I'm off on an adventure. And the hobbit runs, and then it goes through all the different trials, runs into the dragons, gets glory towards the end, and then returns home essentially changed, where the ordinary world and the extraordinary world have been brought together somehow, and you come back integrating the quality of who you were and who you've become on the journey. Now, what's interesting is Joseph Campbell's work seems to have a very strong masculine bent to it. And Richard Rohr, who a Franciscan monk, who's kind of making Catholics cool again, he talks in his book Falling Upward that possibly the heroine's journey is a little bit different. And he's not the first person to talk about this, that in fact, but his concept, if you can see here, is he's flashing up, and this is a piece of work that was done by Ryan Gaffney, where he's basically plotting what Richard Rohr said. Typically, the male journey in the hero's journey has a moment of humility. And sort of like central to the pivot of the arc is this moment where you kind of almost got to ask for help beyond yourself, and you go from the brash confidence of the young warrior to the humble awareness. Now, typically that's represented as God or as Gandalf or something like that, but you're not enough by yourself, and you need to, appeal to a bigger intelligence or the collective, and subsequently that works. Now, what Richard Rohr is saying that I think is quite powerful is that the heroine's journey possibly doesn't have that humility moment, and that it possibly has instead a moment of empowering. And this chart tries to represent that. Now, he's not the first person to say this. And when I think of the heroine's journey, probably the most famous person is Maureen Murdoch, who studied with Joseph Campbell. And what I just want to put out is that while the hero's journey is embedded in our society and has been so for thousands of years, I do believe that when women are telling stories, they may want to explore the archetypes and they might want to explore the arc. I mean, you don't need another white guy telling you how to do this, but just try and not get too caught up in the predominant narrative of the arc, and maybe look for what yours might be. And it seems to me that the pivot point is from humility with the masculine journey, and possibly empowerment with the feminine journey, just something worth exploring. And Maureen Murdoch studied with Joseph Campbell, and there's been some criticism that her version is just simply putting INE at the end of Joseph Campbell's hero story, and that might possibly be true. What I'd like to now do is jump to Al Gore, former Vice President Al Gore, telling a story. And Al Gore is in a TED Talk as well. And I want to try, if I can, with great respect, get to the point where Al Gore stops telling a choreographed story and actually switches into lecturing mode. I think it's quite powerful. So when you look at this from the 2006 TED conference, what you get to see is the difference between a well choreographed, rehearsed and delivered story and just simply informing people. And I think it's just an extraordinary privilege to have this available on the internet for us to explore. So let me jump in. Al's just set up a lot of humor about, put yourself in my position. I used to fly on Air Force 2 for 8 years. And I want you to listen to look for two things. One is his physical animation as he tells the story. And then the second thing is to go deeper into detail and watch how he moves from the abstract through to the specific. And it takes quite a bit of expertise to do this. Here we go. Here's Al Gore.
Story to illustrate what that's been like for me. It's a true story. Every bit of this is true. Soon after Tipper and I left the White House, we were driving from our home in Nashville to a little farm we have 50 miles east of Nashville. Driving ourselves. I know it sounds like a little thing to you.
Now you get to watch the whole thing, but a lot of people often ask me, do my stories have to be dramatic? And you've generally got 3 tools you can use to create engagement. That's humor, drama, or social object theory. And I get that in the dramatic arts, they'll say that humor is drama, but I'm basically saying drama like dramatic, like thriller, tension. Humor, which is exactly what Al Gore's using, and social object theory, which is like cool, interesting trivia, you know, the sort of things you'd say, like, did you know? And if you've watched Jerry Maguire, there's a car scene where Tom Cruise is talking to the little kid, and the kid goes, do you know? And starts talking about rabbits and the size of their ears and other cool, interesting facts. So what Al Gore's using is the humor part of the storytelling, and it's really effective. So stories about other people you admire, really easy to tell. And if they have humor embedded within them, that's fantastic. Now, you don't have to tell one-liners. In fact, the structure of most jokes is that they'll be offensive. So one of the ways to increase the humor in your presentations is to do so through storytelling. And we're seeing just an exemplary example of that with former Vice President Al Gore here right now.
But I looked in the rearview mirror, and all of a sudden it just hit me. There was no motorcade back there. You've heard of phantom limb pain?
And he goes on and tells more jokes. Let me jump it forward a little bit.
We started looking for a place to low cost, family. A couple in the booth next to us, and she lowered her voice so much I had to really strain to hear what she was saying. And she said, yes, that's former Vice President Al Gore and his wife, Tipper. And the man said, he's come down a long way, hasn't he?
You'll notice that Al Gore, a politician who aren't necessarily you wouldn't expect them to be the best at this, is actually personifying the characters in his story. So the man who's commenting on his wife and his fall from grace is, he's come down a long way, and he adopts that voice. You don't even have to do it very well. The thing about public speaking, any humor is appreciated and any drama is appreciated because of the enormous amount of death by PowerPoint that's going on in the world, where we're destroying audiences and disrespecting them by reading slides that they could read themselves. It's a live experience, people. Bring it to life with your storytelling. Let's see if we can jump forward to the moment where this all changes. At about the 7-minute mark, Al Gore stops telling the story.
Tipper was saying, one more burger with fries.
Still in story.
3 days later, I got a nice, long, handwritten letter from my friend and partner and colleague, Bill Clinton, saying, congratulations on the new restaurant out. He's going to talk about information at college. Going to talk about information.
Here's the shift.
He's going to talk about information ecology. But I was thinking that since I plan to make a lifelong habit of coming back to TED, that maybe I could talk about that another time. What's the deal? Okay. I want to focus on what many of you have said you would like me to elaborate on. What can you do about the climate crisis? Recapitulate just 4 or 5. Now, the slideshow. I update the slideshow every time I give it. I add new images because I learn more about records in January. This is just for the United States of America. I'm going to go into new material about what you can do. But I wanted to elaborate on a couple of these. First of all, this is where we're projected to go.
So what ends up happening is we move from storytelling to information sharing, and it's a powerful example. Watch the whole 2006 TED Talk. Watch the first 6 minutes again and again and again to get the delivery of an animated and humorous story. And then just go through the pain of the 7th to the 10th minute of seeing what happens with typical presentations. And what I hope this does through the generous sharing and public exposure of former Vice President Al Gore is we get to see why you need to care about telling stories and get really, really good at them as a public speaker.